Broadcasting from the campus of Lynn Benton Community College. We are the Mid-Valley STEM-CTE Hub. I'm your host, Casey, and this is Closing the Gap. Welcome back, listeners. Today's guest on Closing the Gap is a dear friend of mine and a person that has and continues to wear many hats, Katherine Edmonds. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Yeah, thanks for having me on your podcast.
Yeah, of course. So at one time or another, I was told, I think it was like 37 jobs you've had in your lifetime.
Yes, I think it might be like 38 or 39 now because I've joined a few more organizations recently. But yeah, I counted maybe a year ago or something because somebody didn't believe me, and so I wrote them all down. But yeah, I've had a lot of different jobs and changed career paths many times.
Right on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think 39 is like really impressive because that's more than one a year for sure, and like your work a couple a year.
Yeah,
more than 2 or 3.
Yeah. There was a number of years where I had to like submit 5 or 6. What is that? The W-2 forms or whatever. Yeah, and I had to have an accountant because I was like, I don't know how to handle this.
Right on.
So yes.
Are these all like part-time jobs, or are you it sounds like you're doubling up sometimes, or?
Yeah, I've had a lot of part-time jobs, and I worked seasonally for a little while. I was a ski instructor, and then I also worked for an organization, National Outdoor Leadership School, or NOLS, and they do like backpacking and kayaking kind of wilderness trips. So there was definitely some seasonal work in there. And yeah, I was a grad student a couple times, college student. So, you kind of fit jobs in where you can in those times as well. So,
sure. Yeah, totally. So as long as I've known you, you've always been a woodworker, it seems. And from the sounds of it is that you've had like a lot of jobs that are all so like working with your body and your hands, like physical kinds of jobs. Was woodworking a place where you began this like list of 39 jobs now, or is it kind of like in the middle? What?
Yeah, I'd say I would my instinct is to be like no, but actually I did work at a summer camp when I was like 17, I think, and there was woodworking there.
Wait, does the summer camp make it 40 jobs?
Maybe. Yeah, but I did do woodworking there, but I actually taught mostly kayaking there. So I didn't get into woodworking except for that little bit at summer camp until much later in life. So it was not something, I didn't do shop in high school or anything like that. And yeah, so woodworking came later for me.
Cool. So where did it all start then?
Yeah. So for me, for woodworking, I was in a job that was a more computer-based job, and a friend of mine had told me that he took this furniture making class in Maine, and I had tucked that information away in the back of my head. And when I was sort of bored at my job, I Googled the name of that school, and I saw that they had scholarships, and I was like, oh my gosh, should apply for a scholarship. And told myself, well, if I get the scholarship, I'll go to this school. And I didn't know a whole lot about Maine because I grew up in Georgia, and so I was like, yeah, sure, I'll try this. And then I found out I did get the scholarship, and so I went to this school in Maine, and it's called Center for Furniture Craftsmanship, and it's just a woodworking school to learn how to make furniture.
Cool.
In sort of the more traditional way of using joinery and things like that. And the first class I took was just an intro to woodworking class, I think is what it was. And we made just a bench with dovetails and a mortise and tenon joint, and I just like fell in love with it, and I fell in love with the people I was taking the class with, and it was like I really had not been exposed to creative energy and sort of making things really. And then at that time, I think I was in my early 30s when I took that class, and I had really been far removed from art and creativity for a long time. And so it was like this light bulb went off in me that I was like, oh, I think I'm a creative person. And like, because I think so often we sort of get tracked into art or science, and it can never be both, especially, when we're younger. Is like they're sort of like, oh, you're such a good artist, you're so good at drawing, and like that's the one thing that I think sometimes people are like, if you're good at drawing, you're an artist. If you're bad at drawing, you're not an artist. And so I am not particularly good at drawing, and so a lot of my friends are very good at drawing and are artists and have their MFAs in painting, and so I always sort of put them in the artist category, and then me in a different category, and ended up in sciences. And so it was like kind of this cool light bulb moment for me when I found woodworking and realized that, oh yeah, I can be a creative person in this very different, and I think what it was for me, in this very kinesthetic way where I used my hands, and it was not just sort of 2D drawing, it was like this whole 3D experience.
For sure. Yeah, it sounds like a really enlightening, therapeutic kind of discovery that you made.
Yeah. So I came back and quit my job.
Nice. And which job was this?
This job was, I was working for a national nonprofit called American Rivers, and I was doing water policy stuff around sort of. I'm probably going to get this wrong, but we were writing a report about streams, the importance of forests, and the water quality, basically.
Cool.
Yeah, it's somewhere on the internet.
Yeah, and you have like 3 degrees, and then you were just talking about going to school again. So it sounds like you really like to be a student.
Yeah, I think I really like learning. I think I had a false belief that learning needed to happen in an academic setting, that I really just recently let go, like in my 40s. And yeah, so I have 3 academic degrees. I have a bachelor's in biology, and I have a master's in ecology, and then I also have a master's in mechanical engineering, which is sort of a bit of an outlier. Yeah, so I, and then kind of, it's sort of been an up and down where I've been in and out of kinesthetic fields. So after I got my bachelor's in biology, I worked as a ski instructor and a backpacking guide, and taught kayaking. And that's when I worked for Knowles. And then I think for me, there's this sort of like fear that comes up when my income is tied to like me being able-bodied, I guess. And I think we're all sort of temporarily able-bodied, right? Like,
right, for sure.
And so I was like, I'll go back to school and learn about, I spent so much time kayaking on rivers that I thought freshwater policy would be a really cool thing to know about. And so I went to school for that and got a master's in ecology. And then and then I worked in environmental advocacy for a couple different organizations, American Rivers being one of them. And then I also taught environmental science at a community college very similar to LBCC in Athens, Georgia. And and then I quit that job at American Rivers and did woodworking kind of full time for a while. And then when we moved here to Corvallis, I ended up back in school sort of a long story, but ended up getting a master's in mechanical engineering, particularly in design, which I was mostly interested in sort of the design classes that OSU had, and it just sort of ended up as a master's degree.
Cool.
Yeah.
Accidental masters.
Accidental masters. Yeah. Yeah. I tripped and fell and accidentally got a master's degree. So
that's awesome. As someone who also likes to be a student, I think it's fascinating that you're able to do so much and have these degrees, because like, where do you fit in the time for study and work and play, you know?
Yeah. And I think, I think that's a good question. And I think why maybe I end up back in these sort of kinesthetic fields of like woodworking or skiing and kayaking is like you sort of fit in the play in your work. You get to do the fun stuff while you're working. And I think maybe that's why I got bored in the academic fields somewhat. I think I also I identify as a neurodivergent person, and I think I need to move my body a lot, and I don't love sitting still. I got in trouble a lot in elementary school and sat out in the hall for being silly and moving around, and so I think and I think like I was saying before, that false belief that learning has to happen in an academic setting, and I think there's a lot of ways to learn, but I think we're told how important college is, and right. That you need to have a degree, and I don't think that's necessarily wrong, and I do think it affords people a lot of opportunities that are important, but I also think there's so many other ways to have a career that don't necessarily, you don't have to have that degree or that type of education.
Totally.
But.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just kind of backing up what you were saying of, apprenticeships, mentorships, being a hobbyist, things like that. They can all also lend a hand in getting a really good education.
Yeah, and I think, for me, I went to furniture making school, but I also apprenticed with two different furniture makers after coming back. I ended up going back to that school for 3 months, and they have a furniture making intensive. And once I finished that, I just approached a guy that I knew that did really cool work, and asked him if I could work in his shop because I couldn't afford to have a shop. And he was really generous and let me work there both on my own stuff and on his work, and I learned a ton that way as well. I think that really furthered my education beyond just the more in the classroom type of learning.
Oh, that's cool. So an artist assistant kind of position, or a woodworker assistant?
Yeah. I think, I just sort of asked him if I could help him out, and if in exchange for that, if I could work in a shop. And I think that's maybe why I've had so many different jobs, is I'm just sort of willing to be hey, can I work around here? Can I be of use? So I think that really helped me also see someone, how they ran their business, and how they interacted with clients and all of that kind of stuff that would have been really difficult for me to just start out from school, just interacting with clients and really not having any idea how to do that. And so, that was really helpful for me to do that. And I think, he was very generous to share that process with me.
That's really cool. I think, being able to do those kinds of things is really intriguing to a lot of people. Being able to go work with a master in something that you're really interested in. But I feel maybe there's a barrier to, not everyone can afford to just be free labor for somebody in exchange for their time. And I don't know. I mean, for people that are maybe interested in exploring different ways of doing things, do you have any advice for how someone could accomplish this, working for free and learning?
Yeah. And I think that is definitely a good point. And I think it can be a barrier. It's also a barrier, right? If you need health insurance, those kind of things can be, I have been very lucky that I am in a marriage where my partner has had a steady job and had health insurance for us. So I definitely have privilege in that way, where I have been able to explore more freely in that way, where I haven't had to rely on having a more steady job in particular for health insurance. But I think even like, showing up at maker spaces, right? Like, I think that's a really cool place, like the mill, to learn stuff. And then I also think, if you have a friend that does something that you really like offering to help them on the weekends or different things like that. But I think that oftentimes we sort of see education as such a limited track of like, you need to find a class and then need to take a class in it or whatever to learn it. And I think there are alternative ways to do that. Although, I did learn woodworking from a school and from a class. And so I think it's not the wrong way to do it, but I think there are also alternatives too. I learned a little bit of metalworking while I was in Athens, sort of in a metalworker's shop, and he learned metalworking in exchange for golf lessons from this guy. This guy was very good at golf, and then this other person wanted to learn golf, and he was a metalworker, and so he was like, okay, well, let's trade. And so,
cool.
If you have a skill that you can trade with somebody else, I think that's also another really cool thing to do in your community.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I love the idea of bartering.
Yeah.
So. It's great. So, since we're on the topic of education, how has your STEM education influenced how you approach your woodworking now?
Yeah, I was like talking with a friend about this podcast actually, and I was saying, yeah, there's sort of a STEM focus, and they were sort of saying that, well, like, you have like all these different pieces of STEM of like, the science piece with sort of my biology and ecology degrees, and then the engineering kind of, I think, fits in the technology and engineering, and then math there's a lot of math in woodworking, but I think woodworking in general sort of can bring in a lot of those different aspects of it, and then of course there's like STEAM versus STEM, but the art piece, I think, also comes into play for me largely in my woodworking, and I think I get a lot of sort of influence from nature and my experience with ecology, but also my experience of just being outside in my work, and yeah, so that's sort of,
so it kind of influences your design in a way.
Yeah, I think so. And then I think my engineering degree influences my design process, and my focus was in design, and I think what's really cool to me about woodworking in particular, but I think multiple sort of types of making, is like you sort of come up with this idea, and you're like, oh, I have this idea that I want to make, and then that process of going from the idea to making a 3D object is like incredibly interesting to me, and I think is really the main reason why I have stayed engaged, I think, in woodworking longer than most of my other careers. I've worked on and off in a shop for the last decade, so woodworking, I think, has a little bit more staying power than some of my other jobs, like when I made wreaths in a parking lot for my friend's little brother one holiday season. That didn't stick around, but yeah, I think that process of sort of making your idea into a 3D object it's both like a very personal process, and then it can also be like this really this process that also is in relationship with your community, and can be like, if you are inspired by nature, like your ecosystem that you live in, and the land that you're on, and all of that kind of stuff. And so that is particularly interesting to me right now.
Awesome. So it sounds like you kind of focus on like more of the fine woodworking side of woodworking, I guess.
Yeah.
How any other way I could put that.
Yeah.
Could you kind of explain the difference between the type of work that you do versus the type of woodworking that someone would do if they were in more of a construction type field?
Yeah. And so, so yeah, like I said, I went to this school called the Center for the Center for Furniture Craftsmanship, and that school particularly focuses on fine woodworking, and so that's my education. It's like under fine woodworking.
What is the definition of fine woodworking?
Yeah, so I think like I have feelings about sort of woodworking, sort of that delineation of woodworking, and I think sometimes it can feel far away to achieve that. But I think the definition that I sort of think of that's really, I think most people can relate to, is like if you have a piece of furniture that's been in your family a long time, like maybe a dresser or something like that, if you open those drawers, there's probably dovetails on the side, which are sort of these little angled things, and the pieces of wood come together in a joinery, in a way that is called joinery. And the reason that is made that way is actually a very functional reason, and it's so like when you open that drawer over hundreds of years potentially, that drawer is going to stay together, and so there's sort of all these sort of types of joinery that are designed for this sort of staying power, so furniture can be made and can last a really long time, potentially generations, and so that's, I think, the main delineation versus like in construction, there's more screws and nails and like, you're making things at a much faster timeline and at a much larger scale, although there is like timber framing is basically large scale joinery used for framing houses and things like that.
Oh, like when you think of like a log cabin or something.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. And so that's, so that it can be sort of scaled up, but like, but I think for me, what is interesting about fine woodworking is like you're sort of learning this technical knowledge of how to put wood together, and you sort of know that wood moves and that it's going to sort of, you need to have this certain amount of technical knowledge in order to make your piece go together, stay together, and last a long time. But what is more interesting to me, so like one of my main teachers, Yuri Kobayashi, is a sculpture artist, really, who uses wood as her medium, and she has this very technical background in woodworking and went to a school in Japan to learn fine woodworking, but then actually came to the United States to get an MFA in sculpture, focusing in wood.
Cool.
And so I think what's really cool about her background and what is very inspiring to me about her work is that she knows so much about woodworking that she can break all the rules and make really cool abstract pieces. And I think it's really similar to like a jazz musician, classically trained jazz musician who like knows all of the, the classical music, rules, but then just knows enough to break, so much that they can actually break those rules. And so to me, that's really interesting. That's what's really interesting to me about woodworking is like sort of this more expansive definition of woodworking versus I think sometimes when people think about fine woodworking, it's like they're thinking, oh, well, this is like you're going to make like a replica of an 1800s like piece of furniture or something, and like I think that is really interesting to certain folks, but it's less interesting to me, and I think it also can sort of narrow the number of people who are interested in woodworking, if that's sort of the definition of it, or like, it also I think the focus can be too much on the technical aspect of it, and I think that can be because woodworking has been a more typically male-dominated field, mm-hmm. and I think not that I think technical knowledge everyone should be interested in that, but I think sometimes it's sort of like this checklist of like I want to learn this technical knowledge versus like I want to learn this technical knowledge so it can like afford me all of these ways to expand woodworking in really unique ways.
For sure, yeah. Lots of techniques in both areas, it sounds like. But like more intricate things in the fine working side.
Yeah, and I think for me, I'm like, I think also you're asking me this question while I'm sort of in the middle of this like identity crisis where I feel like I identify less as a woodworker and more as an artist.
Interesting.
Where I think I won't stop working in wood, but I think, it's more, I'm more interested in making like art with my woodworking skills.
And you had kind of recently finished a long project of building your own longboard. Is that kind of part of this birth of more of an artist, less of a woodworker?
Yeah. So I made this skateboard actually for my wife, and I made the board like 5 years ago, but we could not decide on the design for it. And then one morning, and we weren't sure if like she was going to do it, if I was going to do it, and it just sort of sat in my shop for a very long time. And then one morning I woke up and I was like, "What about mermaid skeleton?" And she was like, "Yeah, that's it." And so I really wanted to do that with pyrography, do that drawing with pyrography, and so I did that. I took a class from this really talented pyrographer in Portland at the artist is in Portland, but I took the class at Sitka Center for Arts, which is on the coast, and she really helped me sort of learn how to do more intricate work with pyrography. And so, yeah, that was really fun, and I think it just like really sparked this idea in me that I could like make an object and then sort of embellish it with either pyrography, or I also am really interested in marquetry, which is cutting up really small pieces of wood and sort of like almost making paintings with them.
Oh, cool.
So
like
it's
mosaics or something.
Yeah.
Marquetry sounded too much like my job for a moment. I was like, what?
Yeah. Marquetry. Yeah, it's like I used to telemark ski, which sounds a lot like telemarking.
Yeah.
Or telemarketing. Yeah, so...
Wait, so what's the telemarkistry?
Telemark skiing is like
skiing.
There's sort of like downhill skiing where your heels are like locked down in a binding, and then telemark skiing is like your heels are up or they're not locked down, so you sort of like ski down the hill in a lunge. It's very silly, and I went back to alpine skiing, and it's much easier. So
yeah, it sounds like a lot of pressure on the quads.
Yeah. And I'm not that. I'm too old for that now. Yeah.
Okay, wait. Let's get back on the woodworking thing.
Yeah, totally.
So you're now the co-owner of Highland Woodshop in Corvallis, and your partner Ashley Murbach, your business partner, is or was a guest on the show in season 3. I don't remember anymore. Season 2, I think. And so how did you two meet?
Yeah, so I finished my degree in engineering in March of 2020, and so I had a little bit of time to think. And so I had spent some time thinking about how I was kind of making the decision I wanted to return to woodworking instead of working in the engineering field. And I think I Googled Makerspace Corvallis or something like that, and I found Highland Woodshop and decided to like reach out to Ashley. And I think I actually, like, while I was Googling that, I saw the Closing the Gap podcast. So I listened to that, and Ashley was like, yeah. So I think you connected me with Ashley.
Oh my gosh.
So thank you.
Playing roles in lives over here.
Yeah. It was really... it was cool to listen to that episode and sort of her vision for Highland. And then she also was like, we're sort of looking for someone to help us. And so I reached out, and we talked about, whether, we would hang out and see if I was the right fit. And it seemed like a good, the Nat Stein is also a shop partner. There's 3 of us. And I think we all really complement each other in our different skill sets, and just also really enjoy each other's company. So it's been a really fun, opportunity for me to join them and join Highland.
That's awesome. I mean, being able to work with people that complement your skills and also you get along with really well, I think that's like a real treat to be able to find something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So
That's awesome. So, what is a makerspace exactly?
yeah, so I think there's a lot of definitions of maker spaces, and there's like maker spaces in libraries. There's the mill here is a maker space. So I think it can kind of be whatever people want it to be, but I think for us, Highland is, we sort of think of it as like a community wood shop. But I think what's interesting to me about maker spaces, and I think this is part of my own artistic process, is like I think it's a space to explore that process of like having an idea and making it into a 3D object.
Nice.
And whether that's 3D printing or using a CNC or going through in Highland making something with wood. And I think that's probably my definition of a makerspace because of my own process. But I think what I've seen is that having a shop can be a really big barrier, both financially and technically. So I think like having all of those tools is super expensive. So we want Highland to, be a space where people who either don't have the space, don't have the financial means to have a shop, or like for me, it was a really big leap to want to have a shop. Like, I'd worked in these school shops, I'd worked in construction, I'd worked in shops a lot, but to have my own shop, it felt like a really big barrier to me. And then I was working, helping run the shop at Oregon State in their wood science program, and I had to put together all these different bandsaws, and the students started breaking tools, so I had to start fixing tools. And so basically that sort of, I think, took that barrier down for me, where I was like, oh, I just put together a bandsaw.
Yeah.
Oh, I just fixed a bandsaw. I just changed a bandsaw blade. And so it was like kind of checking off all these things. And so I think that's another reason I think we want to have Highland too, is like to sort of break down that barrier for folks where they can practice, changing out table saw blades or all those kind of things that are tough when you're on your own to even know how to do or like find that information.
For sure. Yeah, just having someone on hand to like, bounce an idea off of or ask a question to.
Yeah.
It seems like it's a great place for hands-on learners to like really be able to grasp certain topics, because I think the idea of like using a makerspace, it's like limitless, right? So it's like, I don't know, I guess just in my mind what I'm saying is I think that like a makerspace could help any student learn anything if they need something more than just a book. You could come in and like work on a math problem with like physical objects or
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I think yes, absolutely, I agree with that. And I think so much of our like sort of the critical thinking piece of our education system has been squeezed out. And so I think it can supplement that for sure, of like, hey, like you have an idea and you're going to have to figure out how to make this. And there's a lot of questions in between to like figure that out. Mm-hmm. And then I also think, I think problem solving, right, is another skill set, which is very similar to critical thinking, but I think it's a little bit different, where it's like you're in the midst of making this and it's not going how you think it's going to go. Mm-hmm. And now you're going to have to shift gears or maybe back up, or maybe it was going to be 20 inches and now it's 15 inches because you made a different cut. And like, how do you sort of wrap your head around that and regroup and pivot? And so and I often say like the difference between or I think I don't say this, but someone said this to me, of like the difference between a master woodworker and a amateur woodworker is like you just know how to fix your mistakes,
right.
And so I think it really is you gain all of these skills of like how to problem solve. Mm-hmm. So
learning in action.
Yeah, and I think that's what I've learned over sort of this long winding career path of mine, of like that. I do I do really like being in a job where I get to do sort of like that kind of hands-on learning and hands-on work.
Right on. Yeah, I really enjoy getting my hands on things while I'm trying to process stuff. And I had the recent pleasure of taking one of your tarweed school classes where we made a bookshelf, which is one of my first like real like not intricate for me, because like my woodworking experience up to that point had been like going to Home Depot and slapping some 2x4s together and calling it a planter box. But that's beside the point. So you also have you also teach at Tarweed Folk School. What is that?
Yeah, and I would say that that bookshelf class was intricate. Yeah, it was a tough class, so I think you did a great job.
Thank you,
and thanks for taking it. Yeah, Tarweed. Highland Woodshop has partnered with Tarweed, and we are teaching classes with them, and this is their first summer offering classes, and they had sort of 3 big weekends of classes, and they had basketry and bike repair and fibers and herbalism and natural building and clay and nature classes. So kind of teaching skills that we are calling practical arts. And so Nat and Ashley and I are all on their steering committee, kind of helping Tarweed get started. And they felt like woodworking fit right in there as one of the skills that they wanted to teach. And their mission statement is, our mission is to tend the land, ourselves, and each other through the sharing of practical arts and place-based skills in the heart of the Willamette Valley. And I think, that mission statement fits right in there with Highland's mission statement, which we are there to sort of, create access to tools and woodworking education. And I think what was so attractive to me about Tarweed too is I think it fits really right into my own creative process of like learning and exploring in your relationship to community and land.
For sure.
I think one thing I have really been exploring in my own work, because I work at Highland, but I also have my own kind of business that I operate under my own name, and I think I've really been exploring my work in relation to my community and my family and my friends. And so, I really liked being involved in Tarweed, because I think that I don't think I realized how much teaching is part of my creative process. I sort of always thought of them as like 2 different things of like, I teach and then I make my own work. But I think so much of that weaves together, where it's sort of like, I recently like had this idea where I really want to make a tray that has sort of constellations on it, because I've always looked at the stars with my mom, and like that's when I look at the stars, I think of my mom and that relationship that I have with her. And so I want to sort of explore my own work and the objects that I make in direct relationship with my family and friends. And so I think I'm moving away from furniture and more into like object making. And somebody recently was saying to me, they were like, I'm a furniture maker, not an object maker. And I was like, oh, I think I'm an object maker. And I think I like making small things and thinking about those in relationship to to my family and friends. And so that constellation tray is sort of one of those things I'm really interested in exploring recently, and have bought the materials to work on that. So
that's awesome. I can really appreciate a sentimental project for sure.
Yeah.
I feel like I have a ritual of around the holidays. I don't really celebrate the holidays, but I'll like get out all of my printmaking gear and I'll like make like a handmade card for everyone and send that out. And it's like this, like, I don't know, I feel like an act of like love and creation is like something super special for people that are into working with their hands.
Yeah. And I think that's what's been so cool to be involved with Highland and Tarweed too, is like most folks that are coming to those classes, like I know for you were making the bookshelf for someone special, and like, I think a lot of the people that are coming are thinking they're going to make a gift for someone. And so there's so much relational aspect of this kind of work, and then you're also building it in relation to your classmates and in relationship to your teacher, and so yeah, that's what's gotten me kind of super interested recently, and I think teaching is so fun for me because of that.
For sure. Yeah, that's great. I mean, those like little surprises that you learn about yourself along the way,
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely.
So I feel like, although you have a very unique, list of careers that you've done over your lifetime, I don't think like the experience of not wanting to settle or getting bored or however it looks, I don't think that's as unique. It is a unique experience as maybe just like yours personally. I don't know what I'm trying to say. Anyway, I was wondering if you had any advice for young people that are like looking to follow a similar kind of career path where it's like, I want to do this for a little while. I want to do this for a little while. Do you have any?
Yeah. I mean, I think that I think sometimes the pressure to know what you're going to do for the rest of your life at age 18 to pick your major in college can be very daunting. And so I think hopefully maybe hearing somebody that has bopped around in a few different fields is helpful. I would say, I think probably, looking at alternative learning, I think is always a good thing to do. Like trying, and then also trying a bunch of stuff out. Like I wish that, I had the opportunity. I went to college, I was 17, and I was just like, I don't know, biology. And I had actually picked math, but math was at 8 a.m. and I just could not make it to the classes. And so I think sometimes it's just like, just sort of pick things because we're like, oh, this is the thing that seems kind of interesting at the time, and then it might not be. And so I think just knowing that you're not stuck in that, I think is really can be comforting. And then I think I would just say the most powerful gift you can give to yourself is like to learn how to learn, and to be willing to start over. I think if you can do that, then you can pretty much do anything you want.
Yeah, that's awesome. Totally. And to learn. So up to this point, what do you think maybe your proudest accomplishment is?
Yeah, I think, sometimes it can be like not the biggest confidence booster when you're like, God, I've had so many jobs and I've had to start over so many times. But I think one of the things I am really proud of is I have gained a lot of woodworking knowledge, both through going to several different schools. I've continued to go to woodworking schools. I've also gone to a school, Anderson Ranch, and recently Florida School of Woodwork, and then there's also one, Port Townsend Wood School. So I keep taking classes, and so I think having sort of this pretty robust woodworking education that I get to share with people at Highland Woodshop, and then also through Tarweed, is like, I feel like that feels really cool. And I think also because I've basically taught in every single job that I've had. So I taught kayaking, I taught skiing, I've taught environmental education. So like I feel like the one thread that has gone through is being an educator. And so I feel like I'm also really hitting my stride as an educator of like, oh yeah, I've been doing this for a long time. Like I've been teaching something or another for 20 years. And so I think I'm able to offer a pretty solid woodworking education to folks now. And yeah, I'd say the other accomplishment as far as like something I've made is like shortly after I got out of furniture school, I made this table for my brother who is a wheelchair user, and we were looking at making a table for him that didn't have the typical like 4 legs that kind of get in the way when you're a wheelchair user. And so I kind of designed and engineered this sort of cantilevered table that works really well for him. And I think that was really cool and special to make something that is really functional for someone that I really care about.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. Cantilever table. I don't know if I've ever seen anything like that.
Yeah. So, yeah. And that's, still at my parents' house. So.
That's great. Well, I want to thank you for being on the show today. This has been really fun to chat with you and learn more about your career and everything. Before we go, can you give people a way to get involved with Highland and Tarweed? Any socials, any websites?
Yeah, so Highland's website is, I think, highlandwoodshopcorvallis.com. And we list classes through Parks and Rec, and we have a few classes coming up this fall. And then we also weekly teach. We do mentored time. Nat and I both teach weekly, and so as long as you take a safety class, you can join us in mentored time, and so that's an option. And then Tarweed is tarweedfolkschool.com, and we just wrapped up classes, and so the best way to sort of stay in touch with Tarweed and Highland is to subscribe to the newsletter, which is an option on both of the websites, and then and they both have emails to reach out and ask more questions.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much again. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Closing the Gap. If you like this show, subscribe on Spotify. You can also find us on Instagram at MV-STEM-CTE, on Twitter at Mid-Valley STEM, and online at midvalleystem.org. Until next time, keep progressing.